Very good.
Even the glass.
Yeah!
I just drank my shot glass. Now I've got to keep doing this. Feel good? How are we all feeling tonight?
Tired.
Pretty good, actually. You know, we've been up on this a few times around there, so hopefully it goes alright. Oh.
Well, I also asked him genuinely how you were doing at the same time. So, yeah.
I'm not focused at the best of times, so we'll see how this goes. We good, Sam? Lovely. Welcome back to night 6 of our FOO series. Tonight, Olivia and I will be discussing the ideas surrounding coded language comparisons and some of our positive and negative experiences with them. Coded language is something we've talked about for a few weeks now, so I'm sure all of you are aware of what I'm talking about when I mention it, but for those of you who aren't, here's a quick rundown of what I think sums it up pretty nicely. Example, your parent or guardian says something like, wow, these bins are kind of full. What? You gotta talk louder. Oh, alright, I'll just stop everything and start again. No. Wow, these bins are kind of full. Someone should empty them. This is a double hit of coded language. First, the should implying the need. Second, straight away, just by saying someone and not specifying anyone. There's coded language there. Before I go into a story about how I've personally been in a fairly relatable situation where I've had to deal with coded language, would someone like, wait, let me go on and explain a little more why someone would even want to talk this way. The long and short of it are, people talk like this in order to manipulate others to either think a certain way or act a certain way. Think of it this way. If all you had to do to get somebody to do something for you was to merely hint at it, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Okay. Another possible use of this language would be to get an opinion or point across that may offend people. This way is used very common in politics, I found. Why politics, you may ask?
And politics, duh.
Nobody actually asked, I just said it, but anyway, that's rhetorical. We'll get on to rhetorical questions later. Politicians primarily use coded language to avoid saying certain words or phrases that may seem racially insensitive or straight up racist. Use of the words like ethnic as a blanket term or for all different ethnicities when you're referring to a specific group is a safer way than referring to the specific group. But being specific, I can't say that word too many times, being specific would eliminate all the ambiguity surrounding it, but I'll get on to ambiguity at a later point. For another example, referring to somebody as an illegal alien rather than an undocumented immigrant dehumanizes the person in question, and it can make the person's point more persuasive or agreeable if it doesn't sound like you're talking about another person. That makes sense? You follow?
Yes.
Now that I've explained it a bit more, where are some places you've experienced things like people talk to you in coded language? What are some places?
School.
Workplace. Workplace.
Everyday life.
Everyday life. That's
I'm
something
with
really.
you.
I'm done here. Now, I've talked a little bit about my past experience with life and growing up with Dad and Grandpa before, and I just want to make it clear that whenever I talk about it, something I may say may sound like I was in a really shit place. Truth is, it wasn't, completely shit. There were some shit parts, but it was all right. Oh, I shouldn't be saying that on live stream. I'm ad-libbing that, that's not good. Anyway, some of the experience I definitely had could have been improved. Anyway, something I also heard a while back was, the problem is not the problem is your attitude about the problem. That's a quote I stole from somewhere else, seeing if anybody recognised it. That's sort of, what? Oh, where's it from?
I don't know.
From the internet.
From the internet.
From Pirates of the Caribbean.
Oh no, I've been made. And that sort of stuck with me as far as recalling my earlier years go. A lot of my experiences were not actually a bigger problem as I made them out to be, but the problems I did face affected me more due to my attitude about them.
Good Tyler. Good.
Now, of course, I grew up with all the basic bits of coded language about household chores not being done and things like that, but also something I consider a bit coded in the way I interpreted it was how certain rhetorical questions were asked. The whole point of a rhetorical question being asked is to make a point rather than getting an answer despite it being called a question. Things I'd occasionally be hearing were things like, why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you do as well as you could have on the exam? Somebody like to give another example of a rhetorical question?
Yeah. The one I answered.
The one you answered was pretty good. See, as I told you, we're getting back to rhetorical. We got one. One's good. I'll move on. So the main way I was interpreting this in my situation was to be coded language, asking me things that I really didn't have answers for, hence rhetorical. Things like, why was I being dumb or acting lazy, essentially. I don't know about you, but hearing that sort of thing in me didn't exactly strike a motivation to do better. Understand? For those of you who can't exactly relate to this story, just imagine the scenario. You recently completed some test at school and you got back some suboptimal results, and the feedback on your performance is, why didn't you do better? What are you supposed to say? Do they just want you to, what do they want to hear? Do you just apologize to them?
Yeah.
Don't answer, it's rhetorical, see? For a further example, take this example again, but this time don't even think about what is being said. Just assess the situation based on body language only. What facial expressions are they making? How are they standing? Do they seem relaxed or tensed? Do I seem relaxed or tensed? The verbal coded language isn't the only form of coded language. Body language is fairly coded too, if you ask me. Another easy example of body language being coded language would be Calvin, for example. He's sleeping in the office at the moment, so he's not really a good example, but you know, he can't communicate with us the same way we communicate with each other. He has to use his body to describe how he feels, whether he's happy, sad, frightened, playful, whatever. It's his body language. And the same can be easily translated back onto people. You can judge how a person's feeling simply based on what you see. Now bring it back one further, before you even hear things and before you can even see things, back to what you are feeling. This bit I wrote in a weird bit, so I'm going to hold this one. Because no doubt you'll have some vague idea or feeling of how the whole situation is going to unfold before it even happens. Now, how you feel about the outcome can greatly affect the actual situation before anything happens, don't you think?
Yeah.
Like, you think it's going positive, you're probably going to go happier. You get the point. And has anybody heard the phrase, a failure to plan is a plan to fail? Now, see, I'm getting more with that one, that's good. I don't know if that one was stolen from anywhere. Well, I believe this can simply apply here, even though this isn't technically a plan. You're just wandering up to wherever you are, getting results back. But it's still a situation where you're thinking about it in your mind, and give it enough negative thinking, no doubt it's going to affect the outcome. Better. Back to the example of getting the test results back. This brings up another issue, or brought up another issue for me. I was constantly being compared to one of my siblings. I only have one, but one nonetheless. She's, in case you didn't know, she's younger than me by 1.5 years, and compared to me, in academics at least, she excelled, which is fair enough because she put in at least 200% effort compared to what I did. And the main difference was she was studying for some really high-end course and she was getting into where she wanted to be. And for me, I wanted to pass year 12, which I did, so I achieved a goal. Yeah, I like that. I achieved a goal, that's good. But for some people, that wasn't good enough. Some people were always expecting more from me, which is understandable because I could have done much better if I tried. But where I'd set my sights was not meeting their expectations, and it wasn't good enough for them. I came from a family that expected me from the best from me at all times, which wasn't unreasonable or unrealistic, but like I said, it wasn't my goal. My goal for school was to pass, figure out the rest once I was out. Now, raise your hand, put your hand up. If you've ever heard that it's not a bad thing to have high expectations, or if you've heard the expression, aim for the moon, and even if you miss, you'll land on the stars. That's like almost everyone. Now keep your hands up, I want to drink first. Both are nice expressions and all, but to put a different, more negative spin on the phrase, unfortunately, setting expectations too high can set you up for failure if you aren't fit to make it. Now, what do you think would be worse on your own personal self-esteem than setting a massive goal and, what other people think you can achieve and what they want you to achieve, but it's too hard for you personally? Or if you set a goal that's more comfortable for where you want to achieve what you actually want to achieve, and you make it, but people talk down on you because it doesn't meet their standards. For me, at least, I still chose to set my own personal goals, and you bet I was still told to do better. To reiterate, I passed and achieved what mattered to me. Now, you've heard all about my dealings with coded language and experiences with such. But here's a couple ways I've found to deal with people who speak encoded language that actually doubles as a way to avoid speaking like that. Would you like to hear my advice?
Sure.
I thought that was rhetorical.
No, that one's actually got a question mark. Also it says, of course you do, that's why I'm up here. So I'll break my advice up into two sections. First is how to avoid speaking in codes, and the second is how to detect someone talking in codes and avoid being manipulated. It's all falling apart. So to avoid talking in codes is actually fairly simple, but if you've got a habit for speaking that way, it can be hard to unlearn. The main advice here is to be specific, because being specific avoids the ambiguity of coded language. Remember, I said ambiguity earlier? It's nice, it's come full circle. And it removes the code entirely. Common example of the bins are getting kind of full becomes, hey, Alex, can you take these bins out? Because that removes all the ambiguity of the situation. It's a nice easy fix, but like I said, once it's a habit and a bad habit, it takes a long time to break. So it is possible. I believe you can break bad habits. Now as far as detection and avoiding of being manipulated by someone who is, that is an entirely different ballgame. As for most of you who've been listening, you'll have noticed, that noticing the language people use can be actually fairly easy once you know how to notice. Would anybody like to give me an example of how they would be able to identify somebody talking in a code, or an example of coded language? That's not rhetorical.
Could someone make me a coffee?
Wouldn't hear that anywhere here, would you?
Nah.
They're not very specific as to who they're talking to. It's just a general out there sentence.
Talking to the room type of thing. I'm talking to the room.
Tone of their voice.
Tone of their voice.
Who they look at.
Who they're looking at.
Sometimes it also depends on the person, because I think it also works with children with autism. Like you tell them to hop in the car, and they might think they're actually going to hop in the car. Like the whole
Oh.
me.
I can see that. That's a good point I didn't even consider. Exactly. Now, as far as the few examples I've given already, I personally believe that you're all able to now identify it when you're being spoken to in such a way and notice it. Because I can't exactly say now you can avoid it, because it's about how other people talk to you. So hopefully you can avoid it in this space, but as far as out there goes, just notice it. Try not to be affected by it, I suppose. To wrap up my part of this evening, coded language in comparisons is something we do every day. Whether you're doing it on purpose or not, just try to tell me you've never spoken to somebody in codes or compared one thing to another. Because if you told me that, it's probably lying. Because, right?
Yeah. Oh, that was rhetorical.
My point here tonight isn't necessarily to condemn doing all these things. My point is to make you aware of it. It's all about how we deal with it and understand it and build a resilience around it. Now, typically is when you be told about what you've got to do in practice, but instead, you now get to hear from Olivia. So put your hands together for
Okay, before I start, I just have a quick disclaimer. I love my parents and I appreciate everything they've done for me. These were just some things I experienced growing up and how they've affected me personally. To be honest with you, I don't remember a whole lot of my childhood. I'm pretty sure I've subconsciously suppressed the majority of it, so writing this essay wasn't easy to say the least. But in saying that, for as long as I can remember, I've been told I have an attitude and that I'm very sarcastic. And sometimes, or rather most of the time, it comes across as passive aggressiveness. Does anyone know what that is?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, passive aggressiveness is a behaviour that involves acting indirectly aggressive without being directly aggressive, if that makes sense. In my head, it's never intended that way because 9 times out of 10 I'm just trying to joke, but that's not how other people usually interpret it. And it wasn't really until this year that I actually cared about it. Because for the first time in my life, people I care about, love and respect have pointed it out to me and actually said, hey, this isn't okay, and what you said hurt, or anything similar. And that hit me hard. I never expected to be pulled up for something that was so natural to me. But even though this behaviour hurts those particular people in my life when they're on the receiving end, they still love and respect me, and they still want to be my friend despite this behaviour that causes them hurt. I never intend to ever hurt anyone, and knowing that my friends are able to be so open and honest with me and tell me that even though the sarcasm and attitude I have is hurtful sometimes, they still have my back and are willing to help me through this behaviour that I have and love on me anyway. And this was a moment when I realised that true friends really do exist. Do you guys think that you have a friend that sticks by you no matter what? Knowing that my behaviour can be harmful, I decided I needed to make a change. But before I tell you about how I'm working on changing, I should mention a little about how I assume I came to be this way. My parents and brother are all similar to me. I mean, obviously, because we're related. But I mean in that we all share attitude and sarcasm. I've always noticed it in my brother more than the rest of my family, but in the last few months, I've definitely noticed it in my parents. Recently, a friend of mine came to stay over, and this friend was someone who's definitely copped a lot of my attitude and sarcasm since meeting me. And after her stay, she said to me, I get it now. You get your sarcasm mostly from your dad, and the attitude mostly comes from your mum. Pretty sure I responded casually, but inside I was like, oh, okay, cool. But it actually made sense. I'm not a bad person because of this attitude and sarcasm I have. I just realised that it's a learnt behaviour that I have to work extra hard to unlearn it. I'm going to say that again, and Tyler's going to write 3 key parts to that on the board. I'm not a bad person because of this attitude and sarcasm I have. I just realised it is a learnt behaviour that I have to work extra hard to unlearn it. Thanks. A bad apple on a tree doesn't make the whole tree. It's significant enough to be noticed, but there's actually so much more to the tree that's way more important. There's the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves, and all the good apples. This is pretty obvious, but when we change it up a little and see ourselves as trees, we tend to only focus on the bad apples. And look, everyone has a bad apple or two inside them, but no one is only ever defined by just those bad apples. Take me, for example. The attitude and sarcasm are bad apples, but that's not all that I am. And the same goes for you. Just because you have a negative behaviour doesn't mean that you are that negative behaviour. And just because sometimes that negative behaviour might affect others doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just simply means that you have a bad apple. And maybe it's time to start removing the bad apples from the tree so that new apples can grow. Back when I was in school, I did psychology, and I remember learning about B.F. Skinner. He believed that the best way to understand behaviour is to look at the causes of an action and its consequences. He says behaviour which is reinforced tends to be repeated and strengthened, whereas behaviour which is not reinforced tends to die out or become weakened. He did a massive study using rats, and through this he identified 3 types of responses that can follow behaviour. There are neutral operants, which are responses from the environment that neither increase nor decrease the probability of a behaviour being repeated. There's reinforcers, which are responses from the environment that increase the probability of a behaviour happening. That's not what it says, but it doesn't matter. Reinforcers can be either positive or negative. And then there's punishers, which are responses from the environment that decrease the likelihood of a behaviour being repeated. Punishment weakens behaviour. There's so much to this study, but I just want to focus on the reinforcers and punishment part because I found it to be quite fascinating. I'm going to start with positive reinforcement. Skinner showed how positive reinforcement works by placing a hungry rat in his Skinner box. The box contained a lever on the side, and as the rat moved about the box, it would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately it did so, a food pellet would drop into a container next to the lever. So the rats quickly learned to go straight to the lever after a few times being put in the box. I need to breathe. The consequence of receiving food if they pressed the lever ensured that they would repeat the action again and again. Positive reinforcement strengthens a behaviour by providing a consequence an individual finds rewarding. So to put an example that's slightly more relatable, if your teacher gave you $3 every time you completed your homework, which is a reward, you'd be more likely to repeat this behaviour in the future, thus strengthening the behaviour of completing your homework. Then there's negative reinforcement. Skinner shows how negative reinforcement works by placing a rat in his Skinner box and then subjecting it to an unpleasant electric current which caused it some discomfort. As the rat moved about the box, it would accidentally knock the lever. Immediately it did so, the electric current would be switched off. So the rats quickly learned to go straight to the lever after a few times being put in the box. The consequence of escaping the electric current ensured that they would repeat the action again and again. To simplify, it's pretty much the opposite of positive reinforcement. If you do not complete your homework, you give your teacher $3. You will complete your homework to avoid paying $3, thus strengthening the behaviour of completing your homework. And finally, punishment. It's defined as the opposite of reinforcement since it's designed to weaken or eliminate a response rather than increase it. It is an aversive event that decreases the behaviour that it follows. An example of punishment would be if you do not complete your homework, your lunchtimes will be taken away, or your technology. So there's a direct link between animals and humans. This is not me calling you a rat, but if that's how a rat responds to its environment, then we're pretty similar. We either strengthen or weaken behaviours based on the environment that we are in and what the consequences of our actions are. In my experience from what I can remember, nothing positive ever came from being sarcastic or having an attitude. Rather quite the opposite. All the experiences that came from it was negative, getting told off or hurting people I care about because I wasn't thinking before I spoke. This year though, some good finally came from it. I kept getting pulled up on it by my friends. It might not sound like a good thing, but the truth is it helped me realise what I was doing, because for so long, like I said, it was just a natural response. Still kind of is, but we're working on it. And I didn't notice what I was doing. But now that I know, I can take responsibility for my actions and learn from them and better myself, which is what I'm working on today and have been for a while now. Unlearning this learnt behaviour started with the people I love telling me about it. From there, I practiced becoming aware of it because I wasn't beforehand. And now that I've started becoming aware of it, I can take note every time I say something sarcastic or with an attitude so I can fix it. Another thing I've done is let the people that were constantly on the receiving end know that I'm changing my ways. I'm letting you all know now, working on changing my ways, which has been helpful because they help keep me accountable by telling me if I use it, especially if I don't pick up on it myself. And last but not least, I'm constantly reminding myself of why I'm choosing to stop being sarcastic. Because I want to be a kinder person and I want to be able to control my responses rather than just acting out of fear, frustration or insecurity. So raise your hand if you think that you have a learnt behaviour from your parents that you don't like. Okay. Another question. Do you want to change the behaviour that you just thought about? If you thought yes, I'm here to tell you that it's possible because I'm doing it. And trust me, it takes hard work and consistent effort. You can be the person you strive to be. And right now, I'm giving you and myself permission. Permission to be who you strive to be because I believe in you and you have that power. You can change learned behaviours. You just have to be willing. I am. Are you? Of course, none of this is to say that I didn't get any positive traits from my parents because I definitely did. I'm brave, strong and caring. I'm honest, strong-headed and empathetic. I'm sensitive and wise. I'm me, and that didn't just come from nowhere. It came from my family and their love and support, but it's also from the people I've surrounded myself with over the years. And look, maybe you don't have the same love and support that I do, but that doesn't mean you're any less of a person. In fact, it makes you incredibly strong. And I'm proud of how far you've come up to this point. So just to wrap up, remember this. You can't choose where you come from, but you can choose where you go from here. It's not all the answers, but it's a start.